Hey guys, Dan with Philosophical Fishing. This video is dedicated to Mark, who suggested the topic that I'm about to discuss today. And I think it's a relevant topic to just about everybody who's coming off of benzos or has come off of benzos in one respect or another. Certainly it's going to be relevant to everybody in the respect of, is alcohol something that's going to be safe for me to consume either while tapering or post-benzo withdrawal? And for me as a person in recovery who's had an issue with alcohol in the past, I tend to approach it from that perspective. So not everybody who's been on benzos or is on benzos has a problem with alcohol or substances or addiction like I have. Certainly there's a great number of people out there who have no issues with addiction and were just completely innocently harmed by doctors and were completely naive to the effects of benzodiazepines. So I think this video will be helpful for people in both camps, no matter where you are. But certainly I'm also going to be speaking to people like myself who have had a problem with alcohol in the past. And to start off, I'll give my story of kind of where I was at with alcohol in the early stages. So I took my last benzo on September 26th of 2015. And I was embarking on a new life as a sober individual and trying to navigate those waters, which for a lot of us in early recovery, that's a very tenuous thread, and it can be fraught with a lot of difficulties and pitfalls and booby traps. And so I was pretty sure at this point that I shouldn't drink alcohol because of my issues with substances and with alcohol in the past. And on top of that, I was pretty sure that I shouldn't drink alcohol because I know that benzodiazepines and alcohol are very chemically similar. And just to very simply state the fact that benzodiazepines are basically a solid form of alcohol. And so I knew that if I put alcohol in my body, it was probably going to be a bad thing. And I didn't know very much about benzo withdrawal or benzo recovery at this point. I hadn't read a lot of things on it. I hadn't joined Facebook groups or any other benzo support groups. I hadn't heard of other people's experiences with it. So I didn't really know if I drank beer or wine or whatever. I didn't know if it would give me a setback or a wave. I wasn't even really familiar with those terms. I mean, I had just come off of benzos and I was just starting to kind of wrap my head around what had happened to me after going through my whole psychosis experience and my experience in rehab and everything that had transpired within the last month to month and a half prior to coming off of benzos. But so me being a person in recovery and me being an addict and an alcoholic, my brain naturally would gravitate towards the use of a substance or the use of alcohol to try to alleviate pain or discomfort or anxiety. And so, of course, when I was in early benzo damage, I was uncomfortable, I was extremely anxious, and my mind kept telling me that if I took a drink or if I took a drug, that I could at least give myself some relief from the pain, even if it was temporary. I knew that if I took some opiates, some painkillers, or drank, I knew that it would at least offer me some temporary relief from the discomfort. But I was also starting to learn around this time that if I did do those things, that more than likely it would set off a volcano inside of me, and it would set off an avalanche of cascading bad things and bad effects that would start to happen in my life. I.e., I would want to chase more substances and I would want to chase more alcohol, and then it would be another gradual or very quick downfall for me. So I was finding ways in my recovery community to kind of stay away from those things for a while. But what happened was October 31st of 2015, so I was off of benzos for a little over a month, and I opened up the refrigerator one evening and there was a bottle of champagne, of all things, that was already opened in the top shelf of my refrigerator. And I looked at it for a second and I thought, I knew I shouldn't drink this. I shouldn't do this. but it was just screaming at me and it was speaking to me to take a drink. And if you have a problem with addiction or alcohol, you'll probably understand what I'm saying. I just really, really wanted a drink, and I wanted the temporary relief that I knew that that would offer me. So I grabbed the bottle and I just started chugging it for a few seconds. And then I stopped and I looked at it and I put the bottle back in the refrigerator, and I knew that that was something that I can't do anymore. I just knew for me that that was not an option any longer and that that was going to lead to bad things. And so I stopped right there. And that was the last drink I've taken as of this date. So it's been over 7 years for me since I've had a drink of alcohol. Now, that brings up two main points that I want to talk about in this video. Number one, for me, I'm an alcoholic, and I know that alcohol is going to take me down a dark path. So for me, I had to find a way to get support around the fact that I couldn't drink anymore. And I knew I couldn't do it on my own, and I couldn't do it by myself. So for me, that's where my recovery community came in and gave me the support that I needed to stay away from drugs and from alcohol and from pills, and brought people in around me to foster a sense of community and people that I could relate to who were trying to walk a similar path, because we all had similar experiences drinking and taking drugs. And so they were able to support me in staying abstinent and staying away from chemicals and staying away from substances. That was imperative for me. I'm not saying that that needs to be the case for everybody. Certainly there's many, many ways to get sober and stay sober. But for me, I had tried everything else that I could possibly think of to stay sober, and nothing ever worked. So for me, until I found the 12-step community, I was not able to stay sober on my own. So that's number one. I had to find a way to stay abstinent and to stay away from things. But number two, and the second point I want to talk about, is the idea of putting alcohol in your body when you're damaged from benzodiazepines so badly. I completely understand the notion of wanting to give yourself a break from the symptoms, or give yourself a break and give yourself some relief. I get it. I totally understand why anybody would want to do that, whether you've had a problem with alcohol or not. I'll just say, from everything I've seen, from everything I've read, from people that I've talked to, is that 10 out of 10 times, it's always a bad idea in the early stages. It always puts people back in a wave, and it always backtracks any progress that they've made up until that point. I have not heard of one single case of somebody drinking booze early on in the benzo withdrawal process or the benzo damage process where it went well for them. And I would certainly never tell anybody what to do, and that's not why I'm making this video. That's not the purpose of this whole channel. I'm just here to offer my experience, and hopefully this video will shed some light on this subject. So another question becomes, well, if I haven't had a problem with booze in the past and I haven't had a problem drinking, at what point can I safely drink alcohol again? And the answer to that is as varied as people's experiences and symptoms are with benzodiazepine damage. I have heard of people, and I have talked to people who have gone on, and years later they can drink safely again. And they have a few drinks and they're okay. And it seems like that's mostly the case after they've experienced a huge amount of healing. I don't know if it's 100% healed. I don't even know what 100% healed is. I know I'm not 100% healed, but I'm very, very close. I would say 85 to 90% healed. But again, for me, I can't drink. I know that for me. I can't do it because it's not going to go well for me. Once I put a drink in my body, I just want more and more and more, because I have a chemical sensitivity to booze, and that's just something that I'm always going to have for the rest of my life. However, if you don't have that problem and you're months to years out after tapering off of benzos or going cold turkey or however you came off, you might be thinking, well, when is it safe for me? And again, I can't answer that. I don't advise anybody on whether or not they should drink or use anything at all. That's really up to the individual to decide for themselves. My only suggestion would be is if you are going to try it, I would say go slow and see how you do. I wouldn't go out and just go binge one night and then, throw caution to the wind and see what happens. I don't think that that would be a good way to go about it. I think that would be rather reckless. But again, that's completely up to you. Many people seem to choose not to drink again because they're afraid of disrupting those neurotransmitters in the brain. And I can see that. I could see how that would definitely be a concern. I would say definitely if you're tapering, that drinking would definitely be a bad idea. If you're still trying to taper off of benzos, I absolutely would not drink at all. That is definitely a suggestion that I would make 100% for anybody out there. And getting back specifically to Mark's question on kind of what do you do or how do you navigate those urges, those compulsions to want to take a drink. And that could be a whole nother video, and I could make multiple videos about that. But again, for me, number one, I had to find support for myself in those early stages. And still today, I'm a part of my recovery community. Because for me, early on, my compulsion to take a drink was very, very strong. And that's why when Mark reached out and suggested this topic for a video, I could 100% relate. Because I remember driving around and I remember wanting to go to a gas station or a grocery store and go buy some beers and just, go chug a few around lunchtime. And then having the thought that I know that would be bad. I know that that's not going to be the solution to what I'm going through. And when I was in the early stages of benzo damage, I just wanted to get better. I just wanted to heal, and I wanted to do whatever I needed to facilitate that healing. And I knew that alcohol was not going to be part of that equation, but still I had this compulsion and this obsession and this drive to want to drink and to want to use drugs. It was still part of my psychology, and I had to find a way to get around that. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure that my mind was going to take me back to taking a drink or taking a drug. And as I said, there may be many, many ways to stay away from alcohol or drugs if you're like me and you're an addict or an alcoholic. But I had to first recognize that I did have an obsession with alcohol and drugs and that I needed to address that. And some hope that I can offer you if you are struggling with the same things that I did early on is that whatever you can do to distract yourself while you're having that urge and while you're having those thoughts to want to drink or to want to take a drug, that urge will pass. It will go away. I know it feels like it's going to be there forever when you're in the middle of it and you're really fighting the urge to want to take a drink. But if you can hang on, if you can distract yourself, if you can reach out and talk to somebody and have a support system or somebody that you can rely on and say, hey, I'm really struggling right now with the thought and the urge of taking a drink or taking a drug, eventually, and usually pretty quickly, once you can verbalize it and get it out, that urge will dissipate. Now, it will probably come back, and it'll probably come back many, many times. So you have to be on guard and you have to watch for it. But it will pass. It will go away. I used to exercise a lot. I still exercise a lot. But going to the gym was one way I dealt with it. Talking to somebody else in recovery was certainly a great way to deal with it. Sometimes it's just distracting myself and trying to put my attention on something else. So it could be watching a movie, it could be going for a walk, or it could be whatever it is that you have in your life that you can distract yourself with. But just knowing that that urge will pass, you just need to let it go and let it go through you and give it time to go away. So I don't think that there's anybody that I've ever talked to in the benzo community who would ever say that drinking is helpful or a good thing, definitely while tapering or in early benzo damage. The people that I have heard who have been able to drink again have been kind of few and far between. But again, that's something that everybody's going to have to decide for themselves. And if you are somebody that doesn't have a problem with alcohol and you're looking forward to the day when you can have a glass of wine or two with dinner, I hope you get there, man. I hope that your body heals to the extent where you can enjoy that again. I know for me, coffee was a big thing that I loved, and I couldn't drink it for at least a year, probably 2 years after coming off of benzos, because it would just rev up my system too much. And still today, I drink a lot more tea, green tea and black tea than I do coffee, and I'll have coffee here and there every once in a while. Sometimes before I go to the gym, I'll have an espresso, but that's really about it. I still try to limit my caffeine intake a lot. I think the general rule of thumb is, while you're trying to heal from the benzo damage, is focusing on doing as many healthy things as possible and trying to eliminate as many unhealthy things as possible. That's the general rule of thumb. That's really what the focus should be on. So as I've mentioned in previous videos, watching your diet, staying away from processed foods, trying to eat more whole foods, staying away from alcohol, staying away from drugs, focusing on positive things, and trying to stay away from negativity and negative people. Sometimes that's almost impossible too. And not ever doing any of these things perfectly. The only thing that I had to do perfect was definitely not put drugs or alcohol in my body. I had to do that perfectly. The rest of it, I tried to do the best of my ability, and some days I did really well and other days I didn't do as well. And it's about, again, being gentle with ourselves and giving ourselves compassion and love as we go through this process, because we're the ones who need to give ourselves the most amount of sympathy, of grace, and love as we go through this. I hope this video helped in some way. If you guys have another comment on this subject or things you'd like me to elaborate on, something that I touched on that you'd like me to make another video about, go ahead and drop a comment. I always read your guys' comments as much as I can, and I try to respond as much as I can. And I really value you guys suggesting content for this channel, because I want to make this for you guys. I always approach these videos with what I think would be most helpful, and thinking back to when I was going through it and what I would have liked to hear somebody talk about as far as their experience with this whole thing. So again, if you guys have a suggestion, go ahead and leave a comment. I love you guys, and I wish you all healing.